few of the species out there that are humanoid in appearance, and that creates a question that yet has to be answered by science.
Hits to rip like the beaks of a griffin, with sharp pointy tips and the grip of a falcon, grasping with grappling talents and worn on medallions of battling Sith and no man. So many masterfully sculpted renditions, artistically marvelous, monstrous visions, descriptions of
here at Augusta High School that led to Chris Wood's death.
Humanity is one of nature's success stories. Our species has spread across the planet using our wits to survive, and we use our intellect for more than the pursuit of food, shelter, and clothing. Every culture is steeped in a mythical tradition, an imaginary world filled with supernatural beings. Most of these creatures are unique, and some, like giants, are universal. Why? Here are the facts. Human height varies. Women in the Philippines have an average height of 4 feet and 11 inches, while men in Denmark have an average height of 5 feet and 11 inches. Height varies due to nutrition, environmental factors, and genetics, including mutation. After all, Robert Wadlow, the tallest man in history, was 8 feet and 11 inches tall. So we know that very tall individuals have existed due to mutation or medical conditions like acromegaly, a condition that causes the pituitary gland to produce excess growth hormone. Yet legends surrounding giants don't dwell on one or two isolated cases. From reports of Patagonian hulks to the titans of the Solomon Islands, tales of giant communities linger in the modern day. Descriptions of giants across the world are eerily similar. The biblical Goliath was polydactyl with 6 digits on each hand and foot. Statues in the Pacific bear the same extra digits. If archaeologists didn't know better, they might assume giants were real based on their consistent appearance in the historical record. Would this be correct? Here's where it gets crazy. Thousands of people believe a race of giants did exist. Some base their belief on religious tomes. These theorists think the books of Genesis, Numbers, and Deuteronomy describe a genuine race of giants. Recent discoveries of Apocrypha, manuscripts omitted from the modern Bible, place great importance on these creatures. Another theory focuses on Earth's changing environment. Scientists like Dr. Carl Baugh believe the oxygen-rich conditions of previous eras created larger organisms. Many giant animals could not exist today, they say, because the atmosphere won't permit it. We know organisms can shrink over time in a process called insular dwarfism. Could the reverse occur? There's one piece missing, however: evidence. If there were so many giants, then why can't we find the skeletons? According to some researchers, we have. Fossils of the Gigantopithecus, a primate that lived in Southeast Asia as recently as 300,000 years ago. This 10-foot-tall creature could have coexisted with Homo erectus. Some scientists think this primate contributed to the legends of giants and may even have been closer to humans than we think. Large skeletons have also allegedly been discovered across the New World, and Native American tribes have also attested to the presence of giants like the red-headed Si-Te-Ka in Lovelock, Nevada. In every case, the skeletons have disappeared, convincing some researchers that mainstream science is covering up the evidence. If there is a conspiracy afoot, it's a giant cover-up. Why go to the trouble if giants are already extinct? Or are they? Some theorists argue that the giants are aliens. To this group, the giants are also the fathers of human civilization and constructed Homo sapiens from the hominids they found. These theorists also believe the giants will return. In this case, the cover-up comes from governments trying to prevent mass hysteria. It's an interesting notion, but it sounds far-fetched to say the least. Could mankind have shared the Earth with a larger cousin? Or are all these stories only that, stories and legends? Is there, hidden away in the past, something they don't want you to know?
The sequence of serpents unveiled by ubiquitous snaps of a snapdragon sounds serendipitous, just like the epic of Gilgamesh. Several conspicuous mythical beasts can exist, and in fact they could actually be crossbreeds from angels who planted the seeds, non-indigenous demons.
Not human, and this is why, and of course it's an abomination in God's sight. The Nephilim and all those different tribes with perhaps different genetic characteristics were never supposed to be here. They are literally anathema in God's eyes. And this is why the judgment is always final and without a shred of grace and mercy. However, when you look at the God of the, and people have a problem, why would God do this? But when you look at Jonah and he goes to Ninevite, and the Ninevites, and I've done studies on this, these guys invented the word barbarian in some ways.
Yeah.
You know, when you went to Nineveh, heads on a stake around the city. These people were bloodthirsty, yet God extends the olive branch and sends Jonah, and the city repents. There's grace and mercy extended to the Ninevites. There's never any grace and mercy extended to the Nephilim throughout all of Scripture. And this, I think, is extremely telling because it ties into the book of Revelation at some point.
And it ties into the report that you just read
Yes,
from the geneticists.
absolutely.
These would not be humans, and therefore could not be redeemed or would not be subject to redemption as are humans in the Bible. The thread of redemption that runs from the seed of the woman all the way to the Lord Jesus Christ, let's face it, it's for humankind and not for those who are non-human.
These ruling events out there, we might call them the controllers rather than the watchers, but what's your description of the watchers? Who are they and what are they watching and who?
Well, it's sort of it's a play on words here because we're looking at the watchers from the book of Enoch, and they're the Holy One, the watchers. In other words, these were the angels, and sometimes they were good, sometimes they were bad, depending on which portion you're reading. But we're also watchers here on Earth. Like right now, I consider myself a watchman. I'm always looking at breaking news, what's going on, the global political climate, which obviously is through the roof right now with what's going on in Libya. And then we look at the volcanoes, the earthquakes, the tsunamis, the fish and bird die-offs, and all the other craziness, the volcanic activity that we see happening. And it's just, to me, it's extremely alarming. So I watch this, and so it's really a play on words. I consider myself a modern day watchman, specifically in regard to ancient prophetic texts and how they are, I believe, actually manifesting on the planet. So it's the times are absolutely unprecedented and extremely fascinating.
Yeah, that's it, Lynn, isn't it? I mean, the world events we're seeing now, the natural disasters, the uprising.
In the days of Noah, from the book of Enoch, in the path of giants, revealing Nephilim.
Genesis 6 in the Bible says, as the human population began to grow, and daughters were born, the sons of God, Satan and the fallen angels, had intercourse with human women, thus producing a kingdom divided by the flesh as well as spiritual separation. The temple of God, our bodies, had been corrupted by the seed of the serpent, thus producing our dual and our sinful natures. We had now become two separate things in one body, always at war with ourselves, and slaves to the flesh and slaves to sin. Satan had turned our world upside down. Death had now become the rule for the human race, and the rule would not be disproved until thousands of years later through Jesus Christ.
For he himself is our peace, who has made both one, and has broken down the middle wall of separation, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace, and that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, thereby putting to death the enmity.
No wonder when the 10 spies went over and they saw these giants, they felt like grasshoppers, and they said, there is no way that we can beat these guys. They will just walk all over the top of us. There's even reports of them being 30 foot tall. That's an incredible human being. If there are 30-foot giants in the land and you're 5.5, 6 foot tall, you are a grasshopper in their sights for sure. Watch this. Archaeology has discovered a 47-inch femur bone found in the Euphrates River Valley. And to give you an idea how big that is, this gentleman is standing and he could walk right under the legs of this giant. The real bones have been found like this, and that proposes a problem for evolution, number one, because they say that we're getting better and we're getting bigger and smarter and so on and so forth. Seems to be showing the opposite, that we're getting shorter, if anything, going from 15, 30 foot to 14 foot to 6 foot tall. End of time, before the Messiah comes back, these things that will happen in the days of Noah are going to happen again. Now, what does that mean? Am I saying that there are going to be giants on the earth again and the sons of God are going to come out? What are the aliens? I don't know. Maybe the aliens that are out there that are contacting us in some way, shape, or form, maybe those are the sons of God. Maybe those are the fallen angels that have been restricted by God. Their wings, if you will, have been destroyed. They cannot travel. They're in darkness. So being as smart as they are, maybe they made spaceships, and so that's how they're traveling back and forth. I don't know. And I don't mean to go off and kind of sound crazy, but the reality is we know for a fact that they exist. We have pictographed writings in almost every culture and every time period of flying saucers.
Our hero is stepping back into the spaceship and is taking off.
You saved our planet, and now you're gone.
Back and observe all the things in the lost book of Enoch, and eavesdrop on Nephilim hybrids and fathers who flocked in a pack of 200 deserters. These tyrants who plundered like pirates and lusted for flesh in a cycle of violence. They squandered like pigs in the mud of defiance, abnormal like Dr. Moreau in his science. Monsters without it.
We're looking at Mount Hermon. This is in one of the most northern parts of Israeli-controlled territory. This is on the border of Syria. It is a major lookout point, military observation point. It's been fought over back in 1973. It was taken back by Syria. Then they came back and they took it back. Now the United Nations controls it and protects this mountain. It's called also the home of Azazel, the fallen angels, and home of the abyss, or the bottomless pit, as some call it. In the Greek, it's called the abyss. But there's goes back, and I went through all the religions and different books that I could find about this. We're trying to trace the main point of this vast underground network that seems to be worldwide. But this particular part of it is sealed. It was sealed by Raphael, one of the angels of God. Now, what happened, it said that this story goes through different civilizations. In the ancient Sumerian, the Agigi, or the 200 astronauts, landed here that kidnapped the 200 women. This leads on to the story about how the giants got here. Guys, this is biblical. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, and giants and men of great renown now were born. But they became a terrible plague upon the earth. They were very large in the beginning, much larger than the 12-foot Goliath, if you'll go back and study this. Some were huge, very large. But also in the book of Enoch, it talks about Azazel or Azazel and the same 200 fallen watchers. That's what they're called there. And they also land here. Now, because of all the chaos and the wars and the things that these fallen angels and Azazel taught humanity, they taught them metallurgy, they taught them how to war, how to fight. They say they taught women the art of makeup and the art of seduction and things like that. Well, as the time went on, God became very angry.
Where they landed, and what they taught mankind. It even lists the names of 20 of the fallen angels. But as it pertains to the mystery schools, it is very interesting the kinds of things that these watchers taught humanity. It states, quote, Azazel taught them to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, and made known to them metals and the skill of working them for bracelets and jewelry. Azazel also taught the use of antimony for coloring the eyelids, along with all types of precious stones and dye formulas. From this arose great disobedience. They were led astray, they committed immorality, They became corrupt in all their ways. Semyaza taught cursing and root cutting. Armeros, curse lifting. Barakoyel taught star signs. Kokabel, star patterns. Ezekiel, cloud lore. Arakiel, land signs. Shamziel, sun signs. And Sariel, moon pathways. End quote. According to the Book of Enoch, this is the origin of the mystery schools. The fallen angels taught mankind weapon making and warfare, applying makeup and jewelry, introduced mankind to psychedelic drugs, vampirism, enchantments, and cursings, as well as astrology.
And he sent one of his angels, Raphael, and he bound Azazel, who you can trace this back to Satan, in this mountain. He put him in, he chained him, and they locked him away and covered him with rocks until the end time.
Without any use of a latex appliance, a violent alliance of violent Goliaths, drowned and diluged by the flood into silence. Desirous delinquents, they lost their commission. Now Lucifer's legions, they've turned into demons, chained and blinded and bound in abyss, living with locusts deep in the pit. In the days of Noah,
I believe the earth broke up at the time of the flood, and we still have the scars all over the planet where this happened. They're called fault lines. I lived right by the San Andreas Fault. I've studied the Hayward Fault, the New Madrid Fault, the Golden Fault. None of them are my fault, but I've studied them, okay? There's no question the earth is busted up into plates, and there's no question these plates are moving. And when they move, it causes tsunamis and earthquakes and volcanoes. There's no question that stuff happens. The question is, when did this happen to the earth? I think it happened about 4,400 years ago at the very beginning of the flood. And evolutionists will say, so, well, don't you see that's proof of Pangea? These continents fit together. Can't you see how South America and Africa seem to be a fit? Well, yeah, now hold on a minute. How many have ever heard of Pangea? They teach us in the textbooks like some kind of fact, you know, all the continents used to fit together. I say, guys, now wait a minute. There's a couple things you ought to consider about this Pangea theory before you get too excited. First of all, they'll say South America and Africa seem to fit. Yeah, my house and the neighbor's house would fit too if you slid them together. What does that prove? Nothing. It doesn't prove the street oozed up in between them and the houses slid apart, okay? It's a pure coincidence. The shape of these continents is an absolute pure coincidence based upon the water level. The evidence they use for continental drift is interesting. They'll say the shapes of the continents seem to fit. Similar fossils are found on opposite sides of the ocean. Well, that may be true. But it's also true those same fossils are found literally all over the world. Those fossils found all over the world is just as much evidence of a flood. I mean, a worldwide flood, how far could the dead animals float around? Quite a ways, right? And then they'll say there are magnetic reversals in the mid-Atlantic ridge. Well, now hold on a minute. They don't tell you they shrank Africa nearly 35 or 40% to make them fit, do they? They don't tell you that Mexico and Central America are gone. Hey, señor, ¿qué pasa? ¿Dónde está Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala? They don't tell you that Europe and South America were rotated counterclockwise and Africa was rotated clockwise to make them fit. And they also don't tell you what I think ought to be obvious to a kindergartner. Did you know if you took the water out of the oceans, you would notice there is dirt underneath? I mean, the oceans actually have a bottom to them. How many knew that already, okay? I mean, they do have a bottom, okay? So people say, do you think the continents were ever connected? I say, well, duh, they're still connected right now. What do you mean, were they connected? Hello, they're still connected. They've always been connected. The earth has a crust. Now, the low places are full of water, I understand, okay? But textbooks say, well, yes, there are magnetic reversals at the bottom of this mid-Atlantic ridge. Well, that's simply baloney, okay? There are no reversed polarity areas unless it's where rocks flipped over when the fountains of the deep broke open. That may have happened in some areas. But this is a lie talking about magnetic reversals. Even one author wrote in a book, Deep Crustal Drilling in the North Atlantic Ocean, Science Magazine, volume 204, he said, it's clear the simple model of uniformly magnetized crustal blocks of alternating polarity does not represent reality. What they show you in your textbooks is not reality. Now, Walt Brown has a great book called In the Beginning. I disagree with Walt Brown on a couple of key things, and he's a friend of mine and a brilliant man. PhD in physics, taught at the Air Force Academy for years, has a website, creationscience.com, but I highly recommend his book in spite of our minor disagreements. He's got some great stuff on here on magnetic reversals. No, there are no magnetic reversals, only stronger and weaker magnetism. It's actually a jumbled up mess down there at the mid-Atlantic ridge. See, the Earth has lost 10% of its magnetic strength in the last 150 years. It's lost 40% of its strength in the last 1,000 years. It's pretty overwhelming evidence that the Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker. What does that mean? Well, that means it used to be stronger. And if the Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker, this creates a problem, because if you go back in time about 25,000 years, the magnetic strength would have been too great for life to exist here because of the heat generated. And so the evolutionists have to find an answer for the problem. Hey, we're watching the magnetic field decline, so it must be going through reversals. It has never been observed to reverse. It's only been observed to decline. I think Walt Brown has the best theory on continental drift. Let me play this for you real quickly. This is what's called the hydroplate theory by Dr. Brown. To me, it answers a lot of questions.
We can see on our planet 17 very strange features that can now be systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. This explanation shows us just how rapidly major mountains formed. It explains the coal and oil deposits, rapid continental drift, why ocean floors have huge trenches and hundreds of canyons and volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and most of the fossil record, the so-called ice ages, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. The pre-flood Earth probably had one very large supercontinent containing lush vegetation, seas, rivers, and minor mountains. According to the hydroplate theory, the pre-flood Earth had a lot of subterranean water, about half of what is now in our oceans. This water was in interconnected chambers forming a thin spherical shell about half a mile thick, perhaps 10 miles below the Earth's surface. Increasing pressure in the subterranean water chamber stretched the overlying crust just as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began with a microscopic crack, which grew in both directions at about 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure because of the weight of the 10 miles of rock pressing down on it. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. Calculations show that all along this globe-encircling crack, fountains of water jetted supersonically over 20 miles into the atmosphere. The spray from this enormous fountain produced torrential rains such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The Bible states that all the fountains of the great deep burst open on one day. And it describes these events about 4,500 years ago, which we can now tie together scientifically in cause and effect order as the hydroplate theory. The fountains of the great deep and the expanding steam produced violent winds, some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere, froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced some massive ice dumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals. The high-pressure fountains eroded the rock on both sides of the crack and even threw up the limy contents of many pre-flood seas. Huge volumes of sediments settled out of this muddy water all over the Earth. These sediments trapped and buried plants and animals, forming the fossil record. The flooding uprooted vegetation, moving it to regions where it accumulated and quickly became coal and oil by processes we can duplicate in the laboratory today. Experiments show that as erosion widened the rupture, its width became so great that the compressed rock beneath the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, the hydroplates, still with lubricating water beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of about 45 miles an hour, they ran into resistances, compressed, crushed, thickened, and buckled. The portions of the hydroplates that buckled up formed mountains. Those that buckled down formed ocean trenches. This is why these features are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the oceanic ridges, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated. Every continental basin was naturally left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes. Each lake that grew from rainfall or drainage from higher elevations spilled over its rim at the lowest point of the rim. That eroded a little notch in the rim, allowing even more water to flow through the notch faster, cutting the soft flood-deposited sediments even deeper. This process accelerated until all the lake's water dumped through a very deep slit, forming a canyon. The largest of these was the Grand Canyon. North and east of the Grand Canyon was a huge lake that I have identified and named Grand Lake. Its dumping released more water than is in all 5 of the Great Lakes combined. Grand Lake spilled over its rim, eroded its dam, 20 miles south of Page, Arizona, catastrophically forming the Grand Canyon within a few weeks.
There. That is Walt Brown's hydroplate theory, which to me makes the most sense of anything I've seen. It explains several things. If the crack would widen around the mid-Atlantic ridge as the water is shooting out, it's going to spread out, allowing the basalt underneath to bulge up, which is precisely what happens. As the basalt bulges up, it's going to get cracks in it, and it's also going to slide the superimposing plates away from them. They're going to slide and run into something else, and it would explain the compressed mountains we see in, for instance, British Columbia, where the mountains are smashed from the end. I mean, the wrinkles go up and down. The mountain it's like somebody pushed carpet up against the wall, causing it to wrinkle. I think Christians need to have an answer for those kind of things, and this is one of the possible answers. When the basalt cracked, the water would rush into the crack, cooling it down, and cool rock holds a magnetic field. Hot rock will lose a magnetic field. So when they found what they said were magnetic reversals at the bottom of the ocean floor, they're actually finding the old cracks where the basalt broke, because there were going to be warmer and cooler areas from simply the water rushing in. Those cracks are probably now all full of sediments. So don't let them tell you there are magnetic reversals. There may be a few from the rocks flipping over at the flood, but I think a much better theory is the hydroplate theory. So, as the continents were sliding away, some places are going to be sucked under, plate subduction. Now, Baumgartner has a great theory on plate subduction. I think his ties in here also, that the plates would tend to be sucked down. You ever stir pudding up and it gets a film on top? If you push in on the film on the pudding, it'll sink to the bottom and drag the rest of it with it. Magma does the same thing from a volcano. When it cools down, the lava gets a hard crust, and then if it sinks in one place, it'll drag a whole sheet of magma, of lava with it. This probably happened also during the flood. See, the continents are eroding. When it rains, you have landslides, mudslides, erosion, mass wasting, ground creep. All of those things are happening continually. Like last night in the thunderstorm here. I'm sure a lot of erosion took place around Chattanooga. Well, this mud is going to wash into the ocean. So 2 things are happening. The mountains are getting shorter. The oceans are filling in. But at the current rate of erosion, the continents are going to erode flat in 14 million years. So the evolutionists have a serious problem. They have to explain 2 things. Why aren't the oceans full of mud? Because there's only a few thousand years worth of mud in the oceans. And why haven't the mountains eroded away yet? That's why this Pangea theory is so important to them, because they can say, oh, it's being recycled. They'll say the ocean floor doesn't have much mud because it gets pulled under and remelted and it comes up again in the middle. So it's being recycled. Well, that may be, but there's another reason. It may be there's not much mud down there because it's not millions of years old. Plates are moving, there's not much question about that, but that doesn't prove they've always been moving, and it doesn't prove the rate has always been the same as we see today. I think students should be told there are other options than what they're being taught in school. Now, I live right by Interstate 10 in Pensacola, Florida. Interstate 10 runs all the way from Los Angeles to Jacksonville, Florida. If I see somebody headed east on Interstate 10 at 70 miles an hour, does that prove they started in Los Angeles 4 days ago? No, they might have just got on at the last exit, right? And just because we see these continents moving a little bit today does not prove anything long-term historically. Don't fall for that propaganda. The continental drift theory is designed to avoid two problems for the evolutionist. One, the magnetic field's getting weaker. Number two, there's very little sediment in the ocean. And another explanation for that might be that the Bible is right and the earth is not billions.
The Book of the Cave of Treasures. It tells of fallen angels and the bastard children called Nephilim. God destroyed the Nephilim's bodies and doomed them to wander the earth in an invisible dimension, and they are still terrifying men. In our modern paradigm, they are known as demon spirits. The word demon is from the Greek language and means knowledge. The demon knowledge is greater than man's. The Bible tells of their creation in Genesis chapter 6, and they were the cause of the destruction of life on earth. The Apocrypha and early Jewish writings expound on these evil spirits. The Book of Enoch tells of their giant stature and how they manipulated the genetics of man and animals in every imaginable way. In other words, no stone was left unturned in their evil experiments.
The answer to all this and the clue to this cosmic riddle may be found in the ancient book of Genesis. And back there in chapter 6, we are told of a very amazing and bizarre event. The sons of God saw the daughters of men and saw that they were beautiful, and they lusted after them. And then we read they married them and sired children from them. For the past 1500 years, most scholars, including evangelical scholars, have interpreted the sons of God as the good sons of Seth, and the daughters of men as the wicked daughters of Cain. They've adopted that interpretation because the other one is so bizarre and outlandish. The ancient interpretation, and in my opinion the correct one, is that the sons of God were demonic beings or fallen angels, and that they came down to earth, they lusted after the daughters of men, they married them, and produced this amazing progeny, this hybrid progeny of the Nephilim. And the very word Nephilim does not mean giants. It comes from the root Nephal, fallen ones. The early Christian fathers in the first 4 centuries, men like Irenaeus, Tertullian, Ambrose, for 400 years they knew no other interpretation except that the sons of God were angelic beings. Josephus, the cosmopolitan Jewish historian, says the same thing.
From our time in our history, should we be blind to the mystery? Willingly ignorant to the reality. Fallacies formed by fallacious facsimiles, angelic offspring conspiracies, possibly aliens visiting, revealing sinister enemies, posing as saviors with remedies. History, mental capacities, cavities, demons are grabbing our faculties, abducting sanity, offering new age mentalities, fraudulent phonies who mimic and imitate, based in satanic black magic, facilitate UFO sightings, debacle, debauchery, sorcery, portable forgeries, copied demonically, forged by a fork-tongued mythology. Genesis 6 talks of Nephilim vividly, mentioning stories of alien babies and women apparently forced to endure hybrid pregnancy. In the days of Noah, from the book of can.
Describe what they look like.
I could, but it would probably take a whole lot of time. The reason I state that, when I got out in 1989, we had cataloged 57 different species. You have individuals that look very much like you and myself that could walk among us and you wouldn't even notice the difference, except for some of the things that they might be able to go ahead, even in a dark room, and touch an object and go ahead and identify what color that object might be. They would have a heightened sense of smell, sight, hearing. The situation is that you have various types of what we normally call grays. We didn't call them grays in the military, but you had at least 3 types of the grays. You had some that were much taller than we were. The unique thing that I'd like to point out for the most part is that the entities that we did catalog were in fact humanoid. Now this created a situation where the scientific community was trying to figure out why that would be the case, because you would expect that if life evolved on other planets, that they would take on some type of other being, so to speak, not necessarily look humanoid or be bipedal such as we are. But
perhaps the most ancient of all Chinese texts is the mysterious Yi King, which describes how humans were genetically modified by a goddess known as Nu Kua. She was a reptilian whose descendants became the emperors of China. Time and time again, we see rock carvings and ancient texts from all over planet Earth telling us that dragon-like reptilian humanoids invaded planet Earth and genetically created a race of hybrid alien human rulers.
Ancient legends tell of flying people who arrived amidst fire and thundering noise. If ancient astronauts did land here, what effect would they have had upon early Earthmen? Perhaps they were worshipped, feared, loved. Perhaps they brought gifts, a new world of knowledge. If we accept the premise that beings from another civilization visited here ages ago, then some of the mysteries of our past take on a new and startling light. The world is a storehouse, an archive of unexplained phenomena. Gigantic creations, in effigy of what? To appease or acclaim whom? Early stone carvers left silent records for their descendants. Folk legend surrounds their origin. Strange stories of gods who appeared riding across the skies in flaming chariots of light. Whole civilizations were structured around these gods. Civilizations which at one time flourished and then mysteriously disappeared. Only stone relics survive to give mute testimony to their time. Their true history has been the cause of much scientific inquiry and romantic speculation. Teotihuacan lies on a broad, flat plain curtained by mountains in central Mexico. It was once the center of the highly advanced Aztec Empire. When the Spaniards arrived in the early 16th century, they found an established society of artisans and intellectuals. The name Teotihuacan means where the gods reside, and the
This was when, in the words of Manilius, Saturn, the first father, fell to the opposite end of the world axis. This sudden onset of chaos, when heaven itself seemed to fall out of control, has haunted civilizations across the millennia, erupting as doomsday anxiety, the fear that what happened once will happen again. It's almost impossible to believe that ancient people sacrificed their own children either symbolically or literally, to the planet god Saturn. Saturn was remembered as the devourer of his own children.
Dream of building on this scale.
Of history explained that the Great Pyramid was originally capped by a small model pyramid called a pyramidion, which was sheathed in electrum, an alloy of gold and silver. Unfortunately, the valuable pyramidion is long gone. Richard Heath's metrology shows the Great Pyramid's pyramidion measured 1 1/11 feet in height. This metallic cap would reflect the sun's light and look a lot like the shining eye on top of the US dollar bill. The Great Pyramid is the sole surviving wonder of the ancient world. It remains the oldest, largest, and most accurate building ever built. It was the tallest structure in the world for 4 millennia. It is aligned within 0.1% of true north, and its 13-acre base supporting 2.3 million blocks of stone is horizontal and flat to within 15 millimeters. The mean opening in joints between exterior casing stones is less than 0.5 millimeter. The scale and accuracy are astounding. I believe that even with all the money in the world, we do not have the technical capability to replicate the Great Pyramid today. There is much to be said about the Great Pyramid's proportions. I've already mentioned how 7:11 was encoded in the Statue of Liberty. Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer used the half-triangle proportion of 14:11 in his esoteric masterpiece Melancholia I. Richard Heath has found the half-triangle also encodes 365 days to 20 moons, an interesting astronomical take on the mystery. Notice how pi and phi, two of the most important numbers in mathematics, are also implicated and interrelated in the pyramid proportions. John Charles Webb Jr. has made a profound discovery about the location of the Great Pyramid that is unfortunately widely ignored because of its utter implausibility. Using Google Earth, we can measure the exact latitude of the center of the Grand Gallery inside the pyramid. It is 29.9792458 degrees north. The speed of light in the vacuum is 299,792,458 meters per second. Incredibly, these are the same numbers. How can this be? This correlation is either pure coincidence or evidence of something very profound.
What are the biggest structures that modern man builds on the planet? The biggest, most awe-inspiring structures we create are hydroelectric dams. Why are we willing to invest such awe-inspiring amounts of labor and effort in constructing those? Because we know we're going to get a very valuable physical return in the form of electricity. And by comparison, I wonder if the ancient megalith builders weren't willing to invest such staggering amounts of resources by even smaller populations because they knew that they could get something very physical and worthwhile back from it.
People are fascinated by Egyptian monuments, and some report the energy is palpable at these sites. Is it possible to confirm this energy through scientific means?
What I've been finding the last 20 years of research is a lot of experiments that have been done that show that there's a certain type of energy that does not exist in our current science. It's unknown with our current science. We call it subtle energy.
Well, this is a whole new trend of thought in looking at ancient structures, that maybe the ancients understood subtle energies.
So this appears to be a technology that may have existed in megalithic societies. You know, these societies that built things out of big stones.
It makes sense that you could motivate an entire population to invest so heavily in building these structures, I think. And I don't mean to say by any means that this is the only purpose of the megaliths, but I think it's pretty clear that it's at least one of the primary or one of the important purposes for building these structures.
We find megalithic sites everywhere around the world, and there's a tendency to make circles or certain types of formations.
Megalithic sites occur all over the world. Is their placement random, or does the location of these sites reveal yet another hidden layer of ancient knowledge?
One thing I've found looking at different megalithic structures over a few continents and numerous places around the world, overwhelmingly these places, the pyramids, the Stonehenges, etc. of the world, were placed on ground where an unusual type of geology naturally concentrates the regular daily natural electromagnetic fluctuations that occur everywhere on the earth each day.
If you go into England, for example, the ley lines that cross England, the Michael line, which is hundreds of miles long, that crosses England, that carries this energy along that line.
It will therefore generate electric currents in the land called telluric currents in the straight geological sense of that word. And those occur everywhere on the planet.
But we know that this ley energy, this subtle energy, passes along these lines.
There are certain special types of geology that will magnify those several-fold. And that's where we found the megalith builders preferred to put their monuments.
And typically where lines cross, where you get more than one line intersecting, temples were often built.
These are called conductivity discontinuities, which sounds highly technical, but it's merely the place where one area of ground that has a good ability to conduct electricity meets another area of ground that has a lesser ability to conduct these natural electric currents.
The Chinese had the same tradition. They call them dragon lines. It was illegal for a commoner to be buried on such a line. A king had to be buried on such a line. They put palaces there. There's a whole series of sacred sites that were always built on lines like this.
I want to say in this area about the location of temples. You have to have symbols appear on the ground. When it's seen, then this is the place where people naturally come to get more healthy energy from that spot. You know, energy puffs from the earth.
And it appears as though they were attempting to control the flow of this energy and use it for their own purposes.
The key hours, unfortunately, are the pre-dawn hours. If you really want to study this, you've got to get up at 3 and get out there very fast. That's because the energy that's involved in these sites, that's really fueling most of it, originates with the daily changes in the Earth's geomagnetic field. It's strongest during the day, weakest at night. And in the hours leading up to dawn, the weaker field lines now come roaring back to closer to full strength very quick. It's the most dramatic time in terms of change of magnetic strength per hour. It's the most dramatic time of the day. And wherever you have a changing magnetic field occurring, you are generating electric current in anything present that will conduct electricity. It's a simple principle of physics known as induction, and it's a universal.
Normally, in everyday life, we don't ever see large concentrations of this energy. Normally, it'll show up at, let's say, at mountaintops, at sacred sites. You'll feel a certain calm, a certain peace. Sometimes people in those places report mystical experiences. They'll see into some other dimension. Okay, they'll see into some other time. The Chinese have known about this for a long time, and they call it qi. The Hindus, in their ancient texts, call it prana. And the yogis, that maintain a very ancient tradition, use it. It affects a variety of different processes. Electricity, magnetism has a strong effect on that. So it modifies all the other laws of physics. When you look back on how sacred sites were chosen and buildings like the pyramids were constructed, the suspicion arises that they understood quite a bit more about this stuff than we do, and they may have been using it in their engineering.
Then the megalith builders designed these structures and then built them in such a way as to further concentrate those energies. So they definitely seem to have known what they were doing.
We are not used to things built out of stone being high technology. It is clear that several different kinds of stone from a variety of sources were used to construct Egyptian monuments. Did the distinct qualities of the stones serve a special purpose?
What I do find fascinating is that the core of the pyramids, at least at Giza, are made out of one type of limestone. Now, it is the limestone that was closest, but it also happens to be the type that's called dolomite because it's got a high magnesium content. And because of that metal content, that kind of limestone conducts electricity pretty well. And then they chose to sheath the pyramid in the whiter Tura limestone, which, granted, it's whiter and it's prettier and all that, but it also has almost zero magnesium content. And therefore, it's a much poorer conductor of electricity. It's closer to a pure calcium carbonate, which is what all limestone is. And pure calcium carbonate conducts electricity much more poorly than dolomite does. It's interesting to me that those outer stones were the ones that they cut so precisely that all these thousands of years later you still can't get a razor blade between them. Because basically what we've got here is we've got a situation with a highly electrically conductive core of those pyramids wrapped in what is effectively a very effective insulator. Why the granite in the passageways, you know? And so, of course, I'm thinking from an electrical point of view and a physical point of view. Is there anything special about granite? And yeah, there is. Granite is slightly radioactive, and it will ionize or electrify the air. Releases radon gas, which is radioactive.
Granite is a transmission stone. It's not dead stone. It's alive.
So you have these sealed shafts with granite linings, and I wonder if it wasn't designed to keep an electrical charge present in those shafts. They were built exactly like, if you will, an insulated wire, only more so because you've got all the charge in the ground that's spread across the base, concentrated all the way up into this tiny spot at the top.
We find similarities in three different constructions. The one at Giza here, Valley Temple, and one at Abydos, and another one abroad in England, the Stonehenge. Same material being constructed with, and same way and same technique. But the construction there, it's built in addition to have the water, because it's water bed. It's a huge water bed, and it's still working, still producing water.
In Egypt, you do have a similar situation to England in that you have limestone aquifers under the monuments.
An aquifer is an underground layer of porous, water-bearing rock. Water flows through the aquifers as rainfall, or when rivers and lakes flood, the water drains into them.
And movement of water through limestone or chalk aquifers is known to produce electrical charge by two different processes that are self-reinforcing. And I've personally measured this for a week at a stretch at Silbury Hill in England, for example. Right before and after thunderstorms, as the water is sinking into the ground, we measured the increase in ground current, the change in the magnetic field as that happened, etc. And in Egypt, you had the Nile crashing, dropping every year and then flooding again. And that movement of water up and down through the layers of limestone would generate electrical charge. Flowing water generates at least a mild electrical charge, which means it generates an electric current, which means it generates a magnetic field as well. So if you were looking to give an electrical charge, a little boost to, say, a mound or something like that, it makes a lot of sense to have it at a minimum running water. And in fact, at Tiwanaku on the south shore of Lake Titicaca, their biggest monument, the Akapana Pyramid, was terraced in such a way as to have the water come down in waterfalls that alternated outside the pyramid, inside the pyramid. But that kind of falling water generates enough electric charge that one of the common school physics experiments is you can, in your own sink at home, if you can divide the stream of water coming out of your faucet into two separate streams, you can take a little LED indicator light and put it between the streams, and it'll generate enough electricity that maybe every 20 seconds or so the light bulb will come on. And then the question is, did some of those layers of limestone run up the Giza Plateau? And they did, and they did, come up to the surface underneath where some of the pyramids are located. The idea would be that it would be the rising and falling of the Nile that would produce this electric ground current by moving through the different layers of the limestone aquifer. And when there was a dip, say, in that supply, maybe that's when the ionized air in the granite shafts and galleries could help keep the process going, if you will. I tend to wonder if the electrified shafts might not have been able to act in a similar fashion to your car battery when you come to a stoplight. Normally, your battery is not being used when you're driving your car. The alternator provides all the juice. But when you stop and that alternator is turning very weakly, that's when you want the battery there to keep everything going so your engine doesn't cut out. So you've got this concentration of negative charge from the ground at the peak of the pyramid or mound, and a concentration of positive charge above it. And if those two become strong enough, you can start to get brush discharge, which would mean it would glow, like ball lightning, for example. It's a theory.
Why in the Great Pyramid is there no frescoes, there's nothing, no decorations at all? Now, some people have proposed the idea that the pyramids are actually energy machines. And so I liken this to the fact, like, you wouldn't put a decoration inside your oven.
I was talking with a woman who had spent some time in the Great Pyramid, and her comment was, it felt like I was in a machine. She said it was not like this, oh, it's a wonderful shrine. She said it felt very functional. In fact, she made a comment that I actually think is probably right on. She said, I felt as if I wouldn't have wanted to be in here when it was running.
Invisible, subtle energy occurs around us all the time and is measurable by science.
We had noticed a lot of people showing us photographs from megalithic sites that disproportionately often seem to have these balls of light in there, usually flash photos.
Orbs are often written off as dust or other particles in the air, but that does not change the fact that they seem to occur more often in particular places at particular times.
At Tikal, at the top of the most energetic pyramid that we found down there, we took a lot of flash photos during the course of our 8-hour stakeouts, which would run from roughly 3 a.m. till 11 a.m. And on the pyramids that were electrically dead, that had no juice, nothing going on, which were the big fancy ones, but the most recently built ones, we would take photos and find out eventually when they were developed, no orbs, no glowing balls of light. But on the oldest pyramid down there, where we did work and got all kinds of results, that was 1,200 years older than the big fancier ones. In that case, the photography we got back from our own simple flash cameras, they were literally choking the screen with these balls at the period at which the air was highest in electrical charge. And on the strongest day down there, I was recording electrical charge higher than I've recorded even in thunderstorms back home. We don't know what orbs are, but our personal guess is that they're balls of ionized or electrified air that will tend to hang together. A good analogy would be ball lightning, where it's simply so electrified that the molecules are excited enough to glow.
Other evidence shows that there is energy occurring naturally everywhere on the planet that our science knows about but seems to ignore. Nikola Tesla sought to provide the world with free wireless electricity for everybody on Earth. He discovered that electricity occurred naturally throughout the Earth's atmosphere and ground. The telluric currents in the ground that John Burke discussed, and the electricity present in the ionosphere in the atmosphere, which is ionized by the sun. He also created and developed ways to harness those energies.
Tesla, who teach Nikola Tesla to get to that power of electricity? And he didn't invent it, it's already there, but he know how to use it. And not only that, he did not take an advantage like Mr. Edison.
Tesla wanted to harness the natural energy that exists everywhere on Earth and make it free to the public. Edison endeavored to produce and distribute electricity by creating a regulated monopoly for profit.
He became rich and the people more light into their home. Yeah, so Nikola Tesla, he's the one think of how to use this energy.
Between 1901 and 1917, the Tesla Tower was built on Long Island as a wireless broadcasting system for telephone and electrical signals. Interestingly, it was constructed on an aquifer with descending passageways and tunnels beneath it. At the time, few understood how it worked. Tesla's funding was ultimately dropped by J.P. Morgan because Tesla wanted the wireless electricity to be free, and therefore J.P. Morgan couldn't make a profit. So even though Tesla's genius was seen by many, he was still driven into obscurity. The energy to create free wireless energy has always existed on our planet, and still exists today.
And it's not the only energy on our planet, there are plenty. Rivers are flow by energy, tsunami is energy, frequencies are energy. If we have the electricity now, it's based on explosion energy. Now, the sound energy based on a technology different from the explosion energy, and it's known as implosion energy.
This energy was not the kind of energy that we have that pollutes. It was a completely passive energy that had no byproducts.
The energy we use today is generated by combustion and is non-renewable. It is called explosion energy and leaves exhaust and pollution.
Our system all over the planet today is based on the explosion energy. That's why the petrol is too expensive.
In contrast, implosion energy, like solar panels and wind power, is clean and renewable. We are beginning to realize that we need sustainable energy.
The implosion energy, very simple. All what you need is the beam of the sun on a running water. Not just running in a straight line, but in a zigzag. And that's, you find all the tunnels are in a zigzag form for such a purpose.
In addition to the limestone aquifers underneath the pyramids, there is evidence of a network of man-made tunnels.
As a boy, when I'm living in my house, which is a few 100 yards away from the nose of what we call the Sphinx Tefnuti, This was my playing yard, and I know tunnels. I walked in these tunnels, I swim in these tunnels, I crawl in these tunnels, and I know that this is one way of creating energy. Now this is cost nothing. I mean, all what you need is a beam of the sun reaching the running water underneath the tunnel, and you can see that there are many openers in each tunnel permit this sun beam reach the water, and when it does, then the energy is there. Energy is not just to run your car, or it's run the people, feed the people.
If the pyramid fields of the Band of Peace and the network of underground tunnels are still there, why don't they generate energy the way they used to?
In the condition of the pyramids now, stripped of those smooth insulating outer casings, it's going to leak electrical air about as well as a car radiator radiates heat. I mean, it's almost perfectly designed to weaken that, and yet still you get these reports of people like Siemens, who was one of the pioneers of electricity, and he was an Englishman. There's even a unit of electrical, I believe, resistance named after him called the Siemens. He was on top of the Great Pyramid, I think, during the 1880s, and they began to notice that when his Arab guides stood up and spread his fingers, they'd hear a ringing. And when he closed them, you wouldn't. And he stood up, and he could sense the literal electricity in the air. And on the spot, he improvised an instant Leyden jar, which is one of the earliest things they used to use to store electric charge. And he did it by opening a wine bottle, wetting some newspaper, wrapping the wet newspaper around the glass wine bottle, and holding the wine bottle up above his head until sparks started to issue from the wine bottle. And at that point, his Arab guides started accusing him of things like witchcraft. They got into a physical struggle, and he accidentally touched one of the guides with the charged wine bottle, and it knocked the man to the ground and unconscious for a short period, after which they took off down the pyramid. But there was, in other words, a professional scientist familiar with electricity in its rudimentary but accurate forms, sensing exactly that, even in this ruined condition that the pyramid's in today. Yeah.